Hi, I'm Douglas Ferguson. Welcome to the Facilitation Lab podcast, where I speak with Voltage Control certification alumni and other facilitation experts about the remarkable impact they're making. We embrace a method-agnostic approach so you can enjoy a wide range of topics and perspectives as we examine all the nuances of enabling meaningful group experiences. This series is dedicated to helping you navigate the realities of facilitating collaboration, ensuring every session you lead becomes truly transformative. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to join us for a live session sometime, you can join our Facilitation Lab community. It's an ideal space to apply what you learn in the podcast in real time with peers. Sign up today at voltagecontrol.com/facilitation-lab. And if you'd like to learn more about our 12-week facilitation certification program, you can read about it at voltagecontrol.com. Today, I'm with Dr. Karyn Edwards from Bloom Consulting, where she supports leaders and organizations as an organizational psychologist, executive coach, and leadership development expert. Welcome to the show, Karyn.
Thanks for having me, Douglas. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, it's fantastic to chat. It's been a minute since we had a moment to sit down and talk about facilitation and coaching and all the wonderful things that you do.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about, so thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into it. So let's start off with how you got your start. Could you take us back to that moment at Carlson Wagonlit Travel where you first saw facilitation in action? I think it was, am I remembering, was it Julianne Weiss?
Yeah, so I worked for Carlson Wagonlit, so it's a French company, part of it. And so I was looks like Wagonlit, but it's Wagonlit. Yeah, I worked there for a long time, and I met Julianne Weiss. She was part of a merger that the organization did, one of many. And I was in a session that she was facilitating, and I thought, I had done technical training for a long time. I actually started off in banking, was a bank teller during college, and then I started training for the bank. And so I had done all this sort of regulation and technical, how to use a computer, and there's technology systems. But I saw her facilitate, and I thought, wow, she's really drawing things out of the group that, instead of telling them what to do, that I thought was so powerful. And I thought to myself, I want to do that. I want to be able to do that type of work someday. And she was really a role model for me. And we're still good friends to this day. So we're actually colleagues now. So she was a huge part of my career development.
Did you ever get to collaborate with her on designs or sessions before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, not in that job, which was funny because, so I left that role and I went to go work for a big utility here where I live in Arizona. And when I got into a leadership role, I called her because she was a coach. And so she actually supported me as a leader as I was learning how to do some transitions and figuring out how do you get along with people and all that fun stuff. And then kind of to present day, she actually helped me figure out that as I was deciding what I wanted to do next, what was my next act after working in corporate America for 30 years. I got in this PhD, and she said, I feel like you really could do this on your own and you'd be great. And she's a super encouraging person. So she's played a lot of roles in my career trajectory. And she's listening, shout out, because she's an amazing coach and an amazing person too.
That's fantastic. Isn't it great to have those folks from time to time that just kind of like push you a little bit, kind of push you out of the nest a little?
Totally. Yeah. She kind of had to drag me out of the nest, but but she did it. Yeah.
So you mentioned a moment there when her memory came back to you when you were finding yourself in that new leadership position. What was it like for you when you had that opportunity to step into leadership? What were some of the things you were noticing and feeling as that was fresh and new for you?
Yeah, so I had been in leadership for a while when I took that job. I had led people in different types of roles and different organizations and things like that. But what was different about that job is it wasn't in my area of expertise. So I had shifted, they asked me to shift, they were sort of doing leadership rotations out from a development role and into an operations role. And it was in a call center and it was customer service. And I was working with a lot of frontline leaders and just finding myself as a sort of a duck out of water, so to speak, on, okay, how do I motivate people? Because most of the time I was working with people that were trying to learn a job and they already had internal motivation. These folks already had their job and didn't necessarily need me to do their job and already knew what they were doing. So it was just a completely different experience. And I found myself kind of rudderless. I think as we were talking earlier about some things, and just sort of flailing about trying to figure out what's right and how do I empower people. I mean, I had some natural abilities and in terms of getting people to talk with me and that type of thing. But like, how do you lead people when you don't even know what they do, right? How do you lead people when you're not the expert at the thing? And so it was a very unsettling experience. And so I reached out to her and said, hey, I know you're not only a great facilitator, but also a coach, and I could really use some help figuring out how do I navigate this space that I'm in.
Yeah. So what was the unlock for you that really kind of brought things into focus, the rudder, so to speak?
So at the time I was having just this feeling of like, I didn't know what I was doing, right? Like sort of this imposter syndrome feeling of, okay, pretty soon people thought I was going to be great at this job. And now they're going to find out that I don't really have any idea what I'm doing. And so working with her, and I've learned this too as a coach over time, is that it's not so much about what people know technically about their job. It's how do you work with other people? That's really what, at the end of the day, is what trips up most people in leadership roles. So it's all they used to call them soft skills, and I call them power skills. It's all these skills of how do you appreciate, how do you get along with other people, how do you maximize their potential and basically get out of their way. And so she really helped me with really overcoming that imposter syndrome piece. And it's funny, I just took a session the other day on this same topic, and it's something like 70% of people experience this at some point. So it's very common. But at the time, I didn't know that. I thought I was the only one that was thinking that, I was feeling that way. And so that was a big rudder establishing, putting the rudder back in the water, so to speak, of, okay, you don't have to know what they do. What you have to do is help them figure out where we're headed and then how they can help us get there. And so for me, that was sort of a light bulb moment.
Were there any specific techniques or tools or even just like things that clicked as you were starting to put that into practice?
Like watching people do what they do, and getting out of their way and realizing that the solutions that they came up with were way better than what I would have ever thought of, because, they know what they're doing. And that my job was to set a vision of where we were headed. It wasn't to be in their day-to-day or tell them how to do everything. Now, it's not to say that there weren't issues that came up from time to time that were, kind of in the weeds and they would ask me for help or that type of thing. But when I think of where I spent the majority of my time, it was on what are we doing next, not what we're doing right now. And so I think that's kind of a distinguishing piece as well of what I learned in that job.
At what point did you start to develop your experience in organizational psychology?
So it was in the same role that I was talking about earlier. And I decided to go back to school and get a doctorate because it's pretty common in my field to get a doctorate. And so, and around that time, as I was working on my doctorate, I was thinking, and so was the company, how are we going to use somebody with a PhD? And at first I was kind of insulted. I was like, well, gosh, there's a lot of things you can use someone for, but I'm not really an academic. I'm more of a practitioner style. And so I decided to switch jobs and I wound up moving over to Choice Hotels. And in that position, I really got the opportunity to take all these things that I had learned, plus all this experience, and sort of put them all together and help with things like establishing leadership development programs and doing succession planning and coaching people internally within the organization. I didn't have the coaching credential that I do now at that time, but I was doing, a combination of coaching and consulting and helping people figure out. And I really felt a natural attraction to that part of my work the most, and really enjoyed it. And so, IO psychology, or industrial and organizational psychology, is the study of people in the workplace. And it has a lot of different facets to it, right? There's some parts around assessing leaders. There's parts around how organizations are structured to make them successful. And the part that I gravitate towards is around leaders and leadership effectiveness overall.
And in your doctorate, was there a particular area of focus in your research?
Yeah, so my dissertation was on the leadership style that leaders have and its impact on employee engagement. So that was the the 300-page document that you can go out and read if you want to.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, it was choice. I'm really grateful to them because they let me do the research at the company, which in an academic setting is very unusual because a lot of research is done on college students, and they're not necessarily representative of leaders and organizations who've been in their jobs for 10 or 20 years. So it was really nice that I got to do that internally. And the research that I found was that leaders who are servant leaders really have the biggest impact in terms of employee engagement. And so that premise, in terms of the different types of leadership, was one of the findings. So kind of interesting.
Yeah. Were there any things that really surprised you or caught you off guard as you were conducting your research?
I guess how many people were interested in helping me. So I put out a survey in the organization and asked people to identify their current leader's leadership style based on some definitions that we had 3 different definitions. So one was sort of the servant leader approach. The second was kind of I guess I'll call it a line manager style, not giving the academic terms, but somebody who does sort of is in the day-to-day giving direction, constant there. And then the last one is sort of these hands-off leaders that are maybe think they're giving a lot of autonomy, but they're really removed and sort of distance from the people that report to them. And, the servant leader was the most effective leader. The distance leader was the least effective leader. And the people in the middle kind of get some successes, but others don't appreciate that style as much. So anyway, I guess how many people completed the survey of a 2,000 person at the time organization? About 900 people completed the survey, which is a pretty good survey response.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was really appreciative. And I'll always be grateful to that group for helping me out with that.
Yeah, that's super cool that not only were receptive to you doing the work, but then also supportive of the research and the degree as well.
Yeah. I remember when I went to one of the town halls after I had finished my program and I was speaking about some business topic, and I just stopped for a second. I said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know, you can now call me Dr. K," because I finished my doctorate, and I got this huge standing ovation, which was, again, one of those moments where it's like, wow, just, I think always appreciating there's so many people that want to help out there. And sometimes you just have to ask.
Yeah, no doubt. It's interesting that I feel like so many surveys are like self-assessment kind of surveys, or they take some sort of long evaluation and then it puts them in a bucket. Interesting that your approach was having the direct reports categorize their leaders. And I guess I'm curious, what were some of the qualities that people would use to distinguish between someone who's like more directive versus someone's more servant leader? Because the offhands is like, that's kind of a very clear bucket, right? They're just not present. But there's some subtle differences, I think, between the other two, or there could be on perception, right? And so I'm curious, what are some of those qualifiers that direct reports were latching onto as ways that they were differentiating?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, so we gave in the research, you gave them very specific academic definitions that are part of a model, leadership model. So they didn't really have a lot of latitude to give us like, hey, this leader has these certain traits. But what we were able to tie it to was once we had the list of leaders in the organization, we had the people who responded, and then what we were able to do is look at the engagement scores for the organization of those leaders, and to see if there's a correlation between, hey, this person's been described by the majority of their team that they're a servant leader, and let's take a look at their engagement score, and their engagement score correlated. And same thing with the hands-off leaders, their engagement scores were lower in the organization's results. And so it was just really interesting to see them define it and then watch it show up in a completely different survey that another organization put out, and just correlate those two things together was kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to ignore when there's definitive clusters, right? It's like, okay, well, that's there, and what kind of meaning are we going to apply to it? So in your mind, I guess for the listener, what are some of those qualities or how do y'all define those academic definitions for the directive type leader versus the more servant leader? Yeah,
so, there's different, depending on which research you read and different models, some of these models have been in place for a long time. And when you're doing a PhD, you kind of have to lean on more academic definitions in order to get through that process. But I would say in practical terms today, what a servant leader is somebody who has the ability to put their own interests behind that of the person that they're trying to help. And so it's a little bit of an ego definition too, right? Where you sort of have to say, yeah, I'm the leader, but my job isn't to be the one to take all the credit or to stand out. But my recognition is actually going to come because of the way in which I support my team and the work that gets done through my team versus the work that I do as an individual. And I think that's one of the biggest distinguishing factors of people that move up successfully in organizations is they understand that switch that you have to make when you go into senior leadership. So you're not getting the work done through your own, self work that you do, but you're getting work done through the people that work for you. And it's a hard transition to make because all through your career, all the way up until that point, you've been rewarded and validated for the things that you've done versus other people around you, or maybe you've been part of a team or something like that. But to actually have the recognition given to you based on how effective you are at helping other people is quite different and quite vulnerable. It's a vulnerable position to be in.
Yeah. And are you finding most of your coaching clients are in this moment of transition where they're needing to redefine their leadership style?
Yeah, I would say most of my clients are in some moment of transition. They're either moving from like a senior level position into an executive team, or they're already an executive and now they're, the world is changing so rapidly that they're finding themselves in, I don't know what the right word is, complexities that they have never experienced before. And so even though they've been an executive before, they're now experiencing that imposter syndrome that we talked about earlier for themselves because it's untested, it's net new challenges that have not been present, like AI, right? For most organizations is net new. There's nothing like it that's ever been before, and it's continually evolving. And they're sometimes struggling with, okay, how do I integrate this new thing, and how do I show up as a leader while I'm leading all these people through this significant processes and times of change?
What's the most common transition? It sounds like ultimately you're trying to help people get to that servant leader mindset or from that frame of reference. What sorts of positions are they? Are they exhibiting those behaviors but needing to refine them? Are they more stuck in the declarative type of leadership or hands off? Or what are you finding that's the most common transition folks go through?
That's a good question. I think the common thing, if I were to boil it down, is transition. So for some people, it can be being promoted and their scope is expanding. And for other people, there's something that's been observed or noticed that they really need to change in order to be effective. And they have a blind spot and they're not seeing it, but they need to transition in terms of behavior. Other people are, buying a business or starting a business, and they're trying to figure out how do I used to work for a company and now I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And, those are pretty significant transitions. Some people I've been working with are thinking about retirement and, okay, so how do I get out of this identity? And maybe that's the word, Douglas, is it's an identity shift. From, hey, I'm this person at work, and then now what? Now that I'm not going to be working anymore or working in a traditional sense, what's my identity? So a lot of work is around that concept of identity.
Yeah, you mentioned transitions, and anytime folks are changing or going through some kind of transition, identity is such a core part of that, right? The story I like to tell in regards to this is when so many companies were going through cloud migrations, digital transformations, there's so many roles that had to shift. If you were a sysadmin at a company that had a lot of servers inside of a data center and now they're migrating everything to the cloud, it doesn't mean you don't have a job at that company, but if you only think of yourself as a sysadmin, it's going to be really difficult. And so a big part of change is that identity component.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, I think, we all have this sort of self-awareness and self-perception of who we are and kind of how we operate within what we know, what we're experts in. And then somebody comes along and rattles that cage or puts a big change in place. Like I've worked in a couple organizations that have gone from waterfall to agile, and just mind bending to people to have to work in these short sprints, and their jobs were completely changed in terms of kind of how they operated. And that's hard because, there's the brain, a lot of neuroscience stuff here too, right? We like to be able to predict what's coming next.
Certainty.
And when that gets interrupted, it's like you just sort of, you can go into the fight, flight, freeze mode, right? Of, I don't know what to do, right? And that's where, as a coach, it can also be helpful to help people recognize through either helping them just through the questioning process of what I call non-directive coaching. And actually comes from Claire Norman and her work. It's called the Transformational Coach. And that process of, hey, you know the answer. It's within you. We just got to clear all this clutter out that's getting in the way of your clear thought process because you're under stress. And so the other thing I like to talk about is we are both thinking creatures, but we also have like chemistry going on in our body at the same time. So when we have stress responses, your brain actually doesn't work the way that it should. So if you're getting all these micro stressors all day long of, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. Oh my gosh, they changed this again. And I don't like that. Then you're getting a lot of cortisol. Cortisol interferes with your ability to use your prefrontal cortex, and your center of clear and logical thinking is diminished. And so, as a coach, I also help people recognize like these patterns that we get into of stress response. And then the third thing that I do is I use assessments to help them understand how they're wired, because we all come into the world with certain personality traits, and then we get raised in certain ways. And so the nature nurture debate has been solved. It's both. And then when you get into the workplace, you've made all of these compensatory strategies to be able to function as a leader. And some of those have worked. And now that you're ascending into a new scope or a broader team or a different job, some of those strategies all of a sudden aren't working for you anymore. And you got to figure out new strategies. And so, working with someone to help think about all of that and then figure out what's right for you and how do you want to show up. But with the fundamental belief that you are whole and capable and competent. And we all need sometimes for somebody to listen and then help us figure out where we go next. And I love doing that. It's my favorite part of my job.
Yeah. So when you think about these transitions and helping individuals work through it, you even mentioned the agile transformation. Similar to the cloud example I gave, people are having to go through identity shifts. Do you often find that when you're doing the one-on-one coaching that opens up needs and conversations at the team level? So in addition to one-to-one, it's one-to-many kinds of engagements to help broader organizations start to grapple some of these transitions?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times in my work, and I just did the talk at the Voltage Control Summit, so that was exciting to talk about how executive coaching concepts can be utilized in facilitation. So oftentimes I'll work with an executive or a leader and they'll say, hey, this is great. And I also, my team, right, they're an extension of the leader. And so they oftentimes will bring me in to do leadership sessions or facilitate meetings or that type of thing. And, the concepts of, first of all, one of the first concepts is that people are whole and capable and smart and can figure out the things that they need to, is applied to the many as well as to the individual. So the collective, wisdom of the group. But one of the things that we talk about in coaching is you have to let go of the outcome, and you have to let go of being right, or giving advice, which I also think applies to facilitation. I think you need to have a structure and a framework, and you need to have an outcome in mind that the group is trying to get to. But how they get there and what they actually accomplish is something that can be applied from the coaching framework into facilitation, because those skill sets of asking questions and helping people recognize what they want to do is really, fundamental to facilitation, and it's also fundamental to coaching.
That's making me think about one of our recent facilitation labs, I was just in New York City. We were having a facilitation lab there at Muro's office. So I went in to help support because I knew we'd have a larger audience and just excited, support our friends at Muro for offering up the space. And so I was assisting Noelle, our regional lead there in New York. And the person that was practicing was struggling a little bit. And I noticed it, and Noelle noticed it at the same time. I also noticed Noelle starting to lean in to give him some advice and maybe even help the audience better understand the instructions. And then I motioned at her and said, just wait. And then once she understood what I was encouraging her to do, just to pause, then I leaned over and I said, that's going to be really great for the debrief. Because especially in Facilitation Lab where we're just practicing in front of a peer group and learning, it's okay if things are rough, right? That's what lab's all about. But the learning is so much richer if we talk about it in the debrief versus if we correct it in the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. That's something that, Julianne and I always talk about too, is the learning or the teaching, if you want to call it that, from a facilitator perspective, comes in pointing out in the debrief. Mm-hmm. Which isn't unlike coaching, where someone will say something and I will reflect back to them, hey, this seems really important to you. You've brought it up several times. What's your reaction to that? Right. So it's just inviting people to react to different parts of information that you're noticing or observing or pulling out along the way, but really sort of letting go of that. I am the sage on the stage, or whatever everybody says, right? And that I have all knowing. It's like, no, you're there to set up an environment where people can do the work that they need to do. And that's another translation to coaching is, as a coach, my job isn't to figure out I'm not a consultant as a coach. I can be, but I try not to be. My job is to set up an environment where people can do the work that they need to do. And a lot of that has to do with the preparation that you do and the questions that you ask. And so there's a ton of tiebacks to facilitation.
Yeah, I like to compare it to being a gardener versus a mechanic. A mechanic goes in with the tools and they put everything at the right torque. They make the engine work. But a gardener just sets the conditions for plants to grow. They can't make the plant grow. They can't tell the plant what to do. It's going to do what a plant does. But and so I think humans are not like cars. They're more like plants.
Yeah, I love that analogy. I might steal that.
Please do. I think more people need to understand that.
Yeah, and it's also if you think about it, take that analogy one step further, right? Like the preparation, right? The soil has to have certain components to it, right? And you have to have certain sunlight and heat, and there's just so many factors. And I think sometimes that's where facilitators might get overwhelmed, is there's a lot of variables in there. But if you set up an environment that you are pretty sure is going to create conditions that would be successful, that's what your role is.
Yeah. And, being prepared for some potential outcomes, but being willing to adapt if things don't, if it doesn't snow, then we maybe don't need to, put up the heat lamp or whatever. It's I think so many times folks get really excited about a design or their plans and they're unwilling to let go of that. And to me, the real thing is just being willing to respond to what emerges.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I've noticed that learning to be a coach has really helped me do. And I often wonder if there's a place in facilitation training around coaching, because I'm super comfortable now, more comfortable than I've ever been, in being able to handle any question from any level of person in any meeting that I'm in, because I don't have to have the answer. That's not my job, isn't to have the answer. And no matter how challenging someone can be, or, things that I'm not expecting, I can be okay with that, because my job is to reflect and to ask questions and to set up an environment. And if when I do get nervous, that's what I tell myself is, that's not my job. My job is to set up the environment. My job isn't to control how this goes.
Yeah, I love that. I think so often folks get so concerned about, making sure every detail's correct and everything's right and it turns out perfectly, that the obsession and concern over all the details means they miss landing the plane when in fact landing the plane was all they needed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I'm learning a new program right now, and I'm listening to the recording of the way that they're doing their certification. And one of the things which I really love, is they're expecting you to know that you know what you're doing, right? And they're giving you here's the what's important part of this. Here's why this matters, this particular concept or piece of information. But how you as a facilitator go through the exercise or what have you, there's so many different options and ways that they're giving you to do that. And I think that's another important thing, is to be flexible. Is that even though this activity was planned to be 20 minutes but people are having a really robust conversation, being flexible to go, okay, well, I'm going to adjust this other activity because this one seemed to be really valuable. And then instead of being, so structured and rigid to a specific timeline, I think that's another sort of key learning, and just getting comfortable, being flexible, really.
That's funny. It reminds me of a recent conversation I had at Facilitation Lab Austin, where someone was talking about a challenge they have around keeping people engaged and maintaining the engagement. And when we kind of peeled back a few layers, it was clear that she was not given the latitude and flexibility to adjust the timing, to adjust, how it was facilitated. Everything was, by the minute spelled out. There was no leeway. If something needed to go longer and something else get compressed, none of that was allowed. It had to be on the money, and it was even audited to that point. There were people that were observing to make sure she did it right. And it's funny because when we really looked at the design, there were some real design flaws to begin with. So not only was there no ability for her as a facilitator to adapt that space to the needs of whoever showed up, it also was designed in a way that didn't create great engagement. So it was like we were a little bit at a loss to give her advice, because it's, wow, you're kind of in a trap.
Yeah. And, companies spend millions, if not billions of dollars on development. And it's stuff like that just makes me cringe, right? Because it's so... I've worked in some environments like that. And I would say if that were the case today, I would definitely not do that facilitation.
Right.
Because you're just being set up to... And everybody in the room is actually being set up to fail, not just the facilitator.
Yeah. And that's a problem, I would say, with a lot of L&D types of facilitation. It's like you're working with people that have just been instructed they have to be there. It's like they didn't sign up for this.
Yeah.
And so
captive audience.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, man. Well, opposite of captive audience, you've been talking about how you're just going through a moment right now, which I think might be reflective of just where the market's kind of shifting from a bit more of a bearish market to maybe a more bullish market, or just people are spending more. You were talking about fish jumping in the boat. So what's that been like?
Oh, yeah. It was funny. I was just talking to someone today. They said, wow, you have a lot of fish jumping in your boat. So I just have been very grateful that there's getting a lot of different types of work. So I do executive coaching, I do facilitation, I do leadership development, I do some speaking. And I've had this really nice blend and mix of all of those opportunities. But really, this year has started off really strong, and I'm super grateful for that and the different types of experiences that I'm getting the chance to do. So yeah, it's so far so good. So I'm optimistic that it's going to be a good year.
I love that, and it sounded like
knock on wood.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounded like lots of coaching opportunities, which it's really great that there's more of that work coming, and you're able to solidify that.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about executive coaching is, to me, it's one of the most individualized forms of development. So, you can go to a class and learn a lot of great things, and you can go to conferences and pick up on new ideas and innovations and all kinds of, and I love all those things are great and valid, but the deep work that you can do as a leader, I think there's probably no substitute in my mind for sitting down with a coach and figuring out what's next for you, what might be getting in your way, and how do you want to go about resolving that, not somebody telling you or giving you a sort of a model. There's a time and place for that in leadership development. I think when you're newer in career, right, learning about situational leadership and learning about the different models of strategic direction and strategic leadership. Those are all important to know. But then there comes a point at which knowing the technical aspects isn't going to solve it. It's how do you move through different transition periods in a way that's going to work for you. And I love doing that. Yeah.
It's almost like it becomes more introspective than tool-based at that point.
Yeah. And, some people want more structure, than others. Some people want to talk through, like a lot of times one topic that comes up a lot is delegation.
Mm-hmm.
And, there are different ways to delegate that some people have never heard about. And so, as a coach, I sometimes will weave consulting into coaching, because if people truly don't know that there's, lots of different ways to solve a challenge, then I'm happy to share that. But a lot of times it's, you can never really fully appreciate where somebody else is coming from, because we don't sit in their seat. We don't have the same lived experience, no matter how similar you are to someone else. So we're all more biased that our own solutions are the best. And so the more we can pull those out and go, okay, well, what do you want to try? What do you want to experiment with? And doing something on a small scale, seeing if it works, continuing to build. And that also builds confidence. Those are all the techniques and things that I tend to work within.
And where do you see all this going? I know when we did the blog post, you had talked about maybe there's a book in the future. Like, is that something that's taken some roots, or what do you think is coming in the future for you?
Yeah. So I'm still rolling that around. I think the struggle I'm having is finding the time, right? Which is probably the biggest factor for everybody. But I'm actually writing some articles. So I've written a couple articles for training and development. So ATD, which is the Association for Training and Development. And I'm writing one right now with a partner of mine about how do you, if you're a leader in an organization, how do you select an executive coach? I mean, it's a pretty flooded market and it's pretty unregulated. There's a lot of great coaches out there, but how do you find the one that is right for your organization and right for you? So we've done, John Reed, who is another co-collaborator with mine, he wrote a book about that subject. And so I'm doing some writing in some different kinds of ways right now. And then I do think at some point down the road, I'd love to get a book out. I'm actually also learning some different programs. So there's a program out of New Zealand, which is called Riders and Elephants. And it's around culture change. So I'm learning about how leaders can impact that, because I think organizational cultures and just the culture that we are all living through right now deserves some thoughtfulness. And so I'm learning how to facilitate. So I'm going to be a lifelong learner. My husband keeps asking me if I'm done. He's like, when are you? I said, I don't think I'm ever going to be done. So those are for me. What's next is just how do I continue to keep contributing in this space in lots of different ways, and then when I finally can get some space and figure out how I'm going to write a book, maybe I need a coach.
There you go. I've had some friends that the book becomes an artifact of all the smaller writings that were done along the way. So maybe these posts that you're working on are the breadcrumbs that take you to the larger work. Yeah, I have my index cards, and the way I write down like all my ideas, and then I have a stack of index cards. So someday those will find their way into a book. Fantastic. Well, we can't wait to see it. And I guess in the meantime, make sure to share the articles. We'd love to read them, amplify them, get the word out, because big fan of what you're doing. And
absolutely.
Thanks for being a part of the summit and being an active alumni. We appreciate all you do.
Oh, thanks, Douglas. And thanks for having me on. It was great to talk with you, and I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, and before we go, do you have a final thought for our listeners?
I would say if you are thinking about your development and you're considering what's next, I would say consider a coach. It can be a transformational experience. It was for me, and I think it can be in a lot of ways. So I think that's my final thought is give it a consideration. Nice. Yeah. Excellent. Well, Karyn, it was a pleasure having you. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks, Douglas. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Facilitation Lab podcast.
If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review and be sure to subscribe and receive updates when new episodes are released. We love listener tales and invite you to share your facilitation stories. Send them to us on LinkedIn or via email. If you want to know more, head over to our blog, where I post weekly articles and resources about facilitation, team dynamics, and collaboration. voltagecontrol.com.